Welcome to episode 705 of Salsido Paranormal. I'm your host, James Salsido, and tonight we will be talking about roads and the paranormal. And this is also a special occasion because I get to say for the first time, I get to welcome for the first time the co-host to the show officially now. Jen, thank you for joining me again and for accepting this new sort of, I guess, would be honorary title since that's basically all I can do. But I'm happy to have you here with me.
Thank you for having me, James. I appreciate it, and looking forward to the show.
Yeah, so this is really just an extension, as the last couple have been, from the last topic that we did, bridges, and we were talking about how roads connect to all this as well. So, and it's really amazing because all kinds of strangeness is seen on roads, not just one thing or another thing. It's ghosts, whatever they are. It's UFOs or aliens. It's creatures. All kinds of things are seen in all kinds of roads everywhere.
Right? It's really weird too. I was thinking about that. How people see when they're out traveling and everything, how the UFO phenomenon out on interstates, and there's something about the zone I think people get into as well when they're driving or when they're in a car, riding in a car, and they're kind of just looking out at the expanse of the scenery and things like that, and then things happen unexpectedly. I've only had. I was thinking about it before we did the show. I only had like one experience in particular. We'll talk about it later. But I had one particular experience that stood out and there were no other experiences I've had, but I've heard about countless experiences that people have had. And maybe they have not had multiple experiences, but a lot of people have these different stories that I've heard that they have, seen things on the side of the road, or something happens in the case of like with the UFOs, people seeing things in the skies while they're driving. So there's something about the layout of the interstate and the fact that space of land is being used mostly for, there's usually nothing on the other sides of the roads except for like property that oftentimes is just being used for farmland or for hay cultivation, at least in the region I live in. So you'll go through these great expanses of land and miles of it, and there's nothing. And I've lived also, too, I've traveled quite a bit in the United States, and I lived in Montana for a while, and the going back and forth between the southern United States and the northwestern United States, and just the great expanses of nothing in a lot of that, and I don't know, spaces of land that people aren't using for much of as far as occupation, not necessarily living in some of those spaces, not in a strong, like not in a formulated way. I mean, there are towns and what you'd consider even villages, perhaps, and then cities and so on and so forth. But there are great expanses of land that are not being used for anything but animals and crop cultivation. And so it's basically just like the interstates and highways oftentimes are going through a great deal of nothing. There's stuff like and there are haunted highways. The concept of I think it was Route 66, which goes through right near where I lived, and actually went right through a town right near a town where I lived in the past. And so there's all these mythologies about those different types of properties, and then how those correlate too with typically those roads being developed from previous heavily used trails. So you have like the Trail of Tears and things like that going through a lot of these regions. A lot of people were traversing those on foot anyway, and then they were used and made into roads for the development of the United States. So I think that they carry a lot of stories with them. But you forget about stuff like that, even though it's still maybe something that could be a explanation for the phenomenon that's occurring there.
Yeah, a lot of energy that maybe it was there before people even knew about it, and then all the people that walk over those paths or drive over those roads now throughout time. Even when you're driving or you're walking, there's no one else at the time when you're walking. You're still going along a path that has been used for decades, centuries, whatever, that other people have used. So there's still a lot of energy that could be there, that has sort of gotten into the land and the air around you, and who knows what else. And it does seem like, at different times, various beings out there are drawn to that energy and or that consciousness of beings traveling along the same route, um, over and over again throughout time. Maybe a lot of time, maybe a long period of time, but still, maybe there's some consciousness out there that does not view time the same way. It does seem constant, even if it's not to us.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. Like one particular occasion, I guess I'll go ahead and. Do you think I should tell that story right now or wait?
You could tell it right now if you want to. That'd be fine.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. But so I was running a bakery for a period of time, and I was selling bread wholesale. So I'd make this bread up, and it was, it was all just that's what I was doing, and and I had gotten accounts in nearby locations. So I had
Uh-oh.
gotten
Not very
several
good.
accounts. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yep, you cut out for a second, but you're good now.
Okay. Yeah, I had gotten accounts within the town that I lived in. And then I had secured this really big account in a bigger town nearby for a new restaurant that was coming in. And so a friend of mine, I paid for the gas for it and everything. It was like, could you just help me to deliver this bread there to this restaurant? And they were fine with it. And I was like, well, thank you. And took the delivery there. Well, the delivery is a good 2 hours away. And there was a lot of just empty land in between. This was not, at the time, didn't matter at all. I was just thinking about, but the build up to where I'm trying to get to is that after we delivered the bread, after I dropped it off, and then was going back to the bakery, and it was probably about 9 o'clock at night, and it was a big account. Anyway, on the way back, driving down the highway and everything, and not really talking, I was just looking out the window, and it was just really quiet. On the side of the road, it was like I saw coming up towards it, like we were driving up towards it, a sort of a dark figure, like a shadow, basically, like a person, basically, but not really. And it kind of just walked right in front of the car. Literally, as we were driving up, it just stepped out in front of the car. And the car, because you're talking seconds, it went through the vehicle. Like there was the car drove through this shadowed figure, and I felt the physical, I felt a rushing by this. It literally felt like something as if you were to kind of shoulder check or something a person when you're walking by them in a hallway or something, right between the console of the car, and just went through, like it bumped right, and the car went right through it. And the driver looked over too at the center console, and it just was this instant seconds that it occurred, and then it was over just like that. And there was no one, there was nothing. We stopped and looked, there was nothing. It was literally we just drove through a ghost or something. And the ghost had physical, it went through the car somehow. So somehow it went through the car, but still had physical presence as it went by. And I was completely just shocked and blown away by this. And I've never forgotten it, and that was years ago now. And it was the strangest thing. And it's the first thing of the kind I've ever experienced. And I spent my life literally my family had to travel for work a lot and for things that they were doing. And so I spent a lot of time moving from places, from one location to another, and a lot of time driving around across the United States. I've lived in many of the states throughout the entire middle of the United States and at least drove through them. Going back and forth between, like I say, I've covered the entire midsection of the United States due to my family moving for various reasons and then myself moving for various reasons throughout that region. And I've never seen anything like that. Never encountered anything like that. But I've heard stories about it since. But just really bizarre.
Yeah, it is. And it is a lot of cases where it's just one person or one group of people, and if anyway, one vehicle full of people, or how many ever are in there. That may be, like you said, that may be the only experience they ever have. That's weird. But then you just have so many of them. If you go on Reddit and just look in any of the paranormal related subreddits there, and just put in road. I haven't done it yet because I know I'd find stuff, and I know I've shared so many stories, true stories on the show before of experiences on roads. I'm sure you would find just several, and you could probably do that every day and find different ones. And so it is really common. I've never really had a major experience while on a road with riding with anybody. I don't drive because I'm legally blind, but my dad and my stepmom did see a rectangular light in the sky at night in the middle of clouds, just for like a second or two as we were driving, and out in the middle of nowhere again, out in the middle of just fields, and it was light, but it was rectangular, and then it was just they were past it. It was not moving much, so they didn't see it for very long. But yeah, so I mean, who knows what that was? I mean, I don't even know for sure if that was anything non-human, but still, people have weird experiences that they can't easily explain like that. Seeing lights or in the sky, but also sometimes just lights, orbs, or whatever, off in the distance near the ground too. So just anything you can think of that people have reported seeing that is unexplainable has been seen along or out on the either side of, or sometimes in the middle of roads.
Yeah. Well, accounts of, I've heard everything from, you have Betty and Barney Hill. You had that scenario where they were just driving, and then they had their UFO encounter, and it pretty much shut down the whole vehicle. They're not the first ones to report things like that, but where there was like this, who knows if the UFO just happened upon the vehicle, or in these cases, like with people who have these experiences out there. But it leaves a lasting impression, and oftentimes they can't recall all the events, but in their case, through hypnosis, they did recall the events that they recounted in the Betty and Barney Hill situation. But there are other accounts too of people seeing things like, like even the accounts of Sasquatch or Dogman, and then of course the ladies in the prom dress thing, and the scenarios like the lady in white. People encountering things on the roadsides, and I think it's because there's so much that. Because of maybe car accidents, could be that. It could be like we were saying, that like cases of used the roads being put down over places where people were already traversing before vehicles. They were already using that as a main, as a pathway, and all the things that could happen when you're traveling, and it's dangerous to travel. And so I would think that a lot of it could come from that, like at the Trail of Tears, like I was mentioning that. I think that, and they've become these major highways, some of them. Like I think part of the Trail of Tears is part of Route 66. I mentioned that. I think that's really, I don't know, where people were being forced to migrate into another area. So, but you have that, people taking risks. For example, the mountain pass roads. Those are pretty intense, I think.
Yeah.
If you're going, yes, where it's extremely dangerous. So, and where people have cut through the terrain to make these roads. So, like in the cases of the mountain passes up in the northwest, or at least the mid-northwest regions through the Rockies and things like that, where they've literally blown out the mountain to make the road. And so you have a road passing through the center of a mountain. So there's all kinds of things that could tie into that.
Right. Yeah, in the chat here, Ricky says he saw a crazy cloud that had lightning inside of it, a single cloud in the sky, and it was It was flashing like it had lightning flashes inside of it. And of course, there's plenty of reports of UFOs, unknown objects, being in the sky, coming into or coming out of clouds, hiding behind them, or literally seeming to be using them for as a just a like making themselves look like clouds to be a fake image or like a disguise. Plenty of that as well. So all kinds of possibilities out there.
Yeah, I
But
mean, like what Ricky's talking about, the something hiding in the clouds or traveling with the clouds. I think when you're out there and you're kind of, you're seeing maybe, I mean, because it's so isolated. Some of these roadways are isolated. Some of them are not. But I mean, I think it doesn't really even matter. But when people are they're in their vehicles and they're just traveling at usually a fairly, fast speed, and there's a zone because of they have a set, you know, speed limit and so on and so forth. They basically go into like cruise control
right,
and they're just traveling. And I think that there's a zone that happens with that where they're maybe in a type of mindset that allows even for to maybe even experience or see some of these phenomena that they might not see otherwise. Even though they're moving at an incredible speed, they get into a type of almost like a hypnotic state, maybe, with the driving, with the sound of the vehicle and the sound of the road and the passing scenery and so on and so forth, and they get kind of in a relaxed zone, in a relaxed state of mind to some extent, and then something kind of appears or abruptly happens. I've heard about people having like time lapse too, where they have sort of where it's like they have like you've heard of stories, people are driving on a long road, some kind of, a road trip of some kind, and they come across like diners, and they go into this diner and like they're going into another time or something, and or
yes,
they come back and the diner is not there, that sort of
yep.
thing.
Gas stations as
Hmm.
well. Yeah, yeah, and it's really weird. I think you can get into that state when you're walking too, or similar state anyway. Because I feel like I've had that before. Not so much only one time with any weirdness with time, but when I used to walk into town to this one restaurant where my family used to meet every week for lunch. I walked there almost every week throughout. I don't know, 2/3 or 3/4 of the year, depending on the weather. I'd walk the same route to get to this place every week, once a week. And so sometimes I'd be walking there and I'd just kind of be not a good thing to do really when you're legally blind, I don't think, but it would happen because I just knew the routes so well. I knew where I was going so well. And so much of it was just sidewalk, and very little, like one or two crossings at all of minor streets the whole way. And I would just suddenly come out of it and be like halfway there,
Hmm.
or almost all the way there. And then, of course, the one time it happened was the weirdest because I I think I must have time did something weird because I got to the location I was going to in like half the time it should have taken me. And I'm not I don't run. I don't try to speed along when I'm moving because I can't see very well. So and I have no depth perception. So um I don't know how that happened other than something weird with time. And there are so many reports of that. People walking or driving and having either missing time or having time seem to double back where I've heard story accounts where people are going along the road and they see something weird or whether it's some kind of craft in the air or even a creature, and then something happens and they sort of zone out or black out and come to, and they are either going the opposite direction on the road or they are a ways back, back to space that they've already been at before, traveling along the same portion of the road again a second time, it seems like. And then, of course, they eventually get to where they're going and find that time really has been strange for that part of that travel.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the accounts too of like the people that when you meet and like when you come across someone, like sometimes like with walking, and I don't drive. I don't like to drive cars, and I walk or I bicycle, and I don't even like being in a vehicle very much. Like I just like a motion thing where I don't even like getting into a vehicle if I don't have to, you
Yeah.
know. And it's really weird, but like even like when you're used to walking a particular location, like I've walked for miles and miles and miles to go to get this or get that to come back. In the past, I have. And when you come across individuals, or come across any kind of scenario, there's there's an in-between feeling where you can't tell. It's like this weird middle ground going on when you're on a road or you're on the highway or if you're on some type of a road out in the country or something. Like in my case, I was often walking where I was living on these country roads that have nothing on it, but like, it's cows and farmland and things like that. And so anything out of the ordinary that you encounter, it stands out because you've walked it so many times, and so it stands out. And you have these old folk tales about like crossroads, and the way that these roads are, what they're named after and everything else. I mean, there could be something to it that there's, I don't know, that there could be the crossroads spirit concept, the idea of these, meeting entities at crossroads or coming across individuals at that. I think that's really interesting, that aspect of it, the crossroads spirits, that sort of notion. So,
Yeah.
but why at
Yeah.
a crossroads? No, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I was just thinking too of sightings of what appear to be regular people, but they're just from different time periods in the past, and or they seem like they're human, but at first, but then there's just other strangeness about them where they don't they talk about things that don't necessarily make sense. I had a story I shared a while ago about someone walking their dog at night near a school, and they came across. We're gonna end with this here after I get done with this because we're almost out of time, and we'll talk more on the next episode. But they came across this older woman and a little girl standing on the side of a road, and they were holding hands. And this person walking their dog just said hello, and the older woman said something about it being really loud outside where they were at, and they were waiting for the sound to stop, the noise to stop. But there was no noise that the person having this experience could hear. And so you wonder, was she sort of, were there two different time periods that were crossing there somehow? Was it a residual? Was it a message somehow that didn't make sense to the person involved, but it would have if they knew maybe the history of the area? It's really hard to know, but there's so many things that could happen, and we will get into more of these next episode here. So that is all for this episode of Salsido Paranormal. Thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. Take care.